One of the most important off seasons in modern Notre Dame football history is underway, and today we're breaking down the key priorities the Irish must get right over the next 8 months to put themselves in the best position to compete for a national title in 2026.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum, producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish since 2020. I am thrilled to have you here with me on Wednesday, December 17th, and thanks for getting your day started right here by making this your first watch or listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. And if you're listening on audio, make sure that you follow the show on your preferred podcast platform. And as always, keep those mailbag questions coming in. You can submit yours in the YouTube comments or on social media. You can find us on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. On today's show, we are diving into what I believe is the most important offseason Notre Dame football has faced in the modern era. That might sound dramatic, but when you consider how the 2025 season ended and what's at stake heading into 2026 with a team that has a real chance to win a national championship, maybe their best chance in a long time, these next 8 months are absolutely critical. The margin for error is gone, and today we are breaking down the top priorities for the football program, from locking up Marcus Freeman to protecting the roster and attacking the transfer portal, and then digging into the big picture questions that could shape Notre Dame football for the next decade. But the #1 priority for Notre Dame football this offseason is they've got to figure out a way to retain Marcus Freeman and his staff. Keeping Marcus Freeman is by far the most important priority for Athletic Director Pete Bavacqua this offseason and pretty much every offseason after that. Marcus has already proven he was one of the best coaches in college football during his young career as a head coach. The fact that he's only been a head coach for 4 years is kind of insane because it feels like he's been around for a really long time. But if Marcus leaves, pretty much everything else we're going to talk about today becomes irrelevant because Notre Dame would essentially be starting from scratch. This isn't like 2021 when Marcus Freeman was promoted after spending a year as the defensive coordinator. There is no internal hire on this staff, in my opinion. So if Marcus leaves, his staff will follow, and so will a lot of players and recruits. That's just the reality, and it's the same at practically every big-time program. But with that being said, it is my understanding that Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman are in a very good place in negotiations on a contract extension. He signed a big 6-year extension just over a year ago, which made him one of the highest paid coaches in college football, and I expect he will receive another significant raise. Notre Dame wants to pay him what he's worth. Marcus Freeman wants to get a deal done with Notre Dame, and I think we're going to get an official announcement in the very near future. We've already seen Marcus Freeman's name pop up on all kinds of coaching hot boards in college football and more recently in the NFL. I didn't take most of them seriously. I never believed he was a real candidate for the Penn State job, and certainly not the Michigan job. I thought LSU was at least worth monitoring given what they can offer, but I wasn't overly worried about that either. But then on Saturday, Diana Rossini of The Athletic reported that Marcus Freeman is on the New York Giants list of candidates for their head coaching vacancy. We already knew the Giants were interested, though. We've talked about it on the show multiple times, and as I've said before, I expect the Giants to hire someone with NFL experience and a more offensive background to build around their young quarterback, Jackson Dart. Jay Glazer from Fox Sports reported that weeks ago that is the direction the Giants want to go, and I believe that's still the case. But as Diana mentioned, the Giants aren't the only team interested. Other organizations have their eye on Freeman as well. And we actually started hearing this last year when the Chicago Bears were looking for a head coach, and I expect Marcus Freeman's name to continue coming up in these coaching searches. There's a lot to like about him, as we know, and I do think he is interested in making the move to the NFL down the road. But for now, I expect him to stay at Notre Dame for at least one more year. He has a very strong desire to win a national championship at Notre Dame, and next season is shaping up to be his best chance yet. He's got the type of star quarterback Notre Dame has been missing entering his second year in CJ Carr. He's got a roster loaded with talent coming back and a very favorable schedule. Plus, Marcus Freeman is only 39 years old. The NFL is always going to be there for him, but opportunities like the one Notre Dame has next year don't come around often. That is a big reason why I expect him to sign that extension and stay in South Bend. And then once that deal gets done, Marcus and Pete Bavacqua will have to fend off other suitors for assistant coaches. We've already seen linebackers coach Max Bulla leave to take the co-defensive coordinator job at his alma mater, Michigan State, and he will not be the only assistant coach to leave this offseason. Defensive backs coach Mike Mickens is going to draw a ton of interest, as he does every single year. Notre Dame has already made him one of the highest paid non-coordinator assistants in the entire country, and it is my understanding that Mickens' salary is already in the seven figures. But we also know that Mike Mickens has aspirations to become a defensive coordinator, and I'm not sure when or if that opportunity is ever going to open up at Notre Dame, especially with Chris Ash settling in and the defense expected to take another step forward in year 2 of Chris Ash's system. Beyond that, I'd expect running backs coach Jaywan Sider to get some looks, possibly for an offensive coordinator position. Offensive line coach Joe Rudolph is probably going to get some calls just like he did last offseason. Gino Guidugli and Al Washington have been around a long time. Maybe they're ready to take the next step somewhere else. But coaching turnover is inevitable for every good program. But Notre Dame has to work hard to retain Mickens and other key staff members because continuity matters more than ever. So that is the top priority for Notre Dame this offseason. The second biggest priority for the Irish is they have to retain the key players on their roster. This time of year, every team in the country is dealing with difficult roster decisions. Contract negotiations are happening, and coaches have to decide which players to prioritize, which ones to keep, and which ones to move on from. It's sort of the cold reality of college football now, and you've got teams like USC who are posting that when they retain their players, they re-sign a contract as if their contract expired or anything, as if this is like the NBA offseason. But again, this is just the world of college football that we live in now. Notre Dame is going through this process earlier than anyone expected because the season ended much sooner than they had hoped for, but they're already shaping the roster for next year. That means paying up to keep players considering the NFL draft or the transfer portal, and also means telling some players at the bottom of the depth chart that their opportunities may be better elsewhere. That is, again, just the reality of college football. And Jeremiah Love officially declared for the NFL draft on Tuesday night, which we all expected. Jadarian Price is going to follow. I wouldn't be surprised if we get that announcement very soon as well. But there are also several key players on the roster who are facing tough decisions about their futures. Defensive end, Boubacar Traore, is a huge player that Notre Dame has to retain for next season. He could go pro, or he could come back to Notre Dame and maybe play his way up to becoming a first-round draft pick. He's certainly not there yet, but maybe with another year under his belt, if he goes out there and stuffs the stat sheet with like 10-plus sacks and has another year that's even better than the one he had this past season, he could absolutely do that for himself. Billy Schrauth is faced with another very difficult decision because I think at this point he's probably at best like a third or fourth round draft pick, if that. But he has also dealt with 2 serious injuries in back-to-back seasons. He's probably wondering if it's worth it to come back to college and risk suffering another injury, which at that point, that could really hurt his draft stock, or he could stay healthy for a full season and then maybe play his way into becoming a second-round pick. I don't blame him. Either way, obviously, I would love for Notre Dame to keep him, but it's a really tough spot for Billy Schrauth. Adon Schuler could probably go pro, or could stick around at Notre Dame, become a 2-time captain, and then maybe play his way up NFL draft boards. Right tackle Emil Wagner could stay at Notre Dame. He could go to the pros, or he could enter the transfer portal. The market for quality tackles in the transfer portal is insane. Like, Emil Wagner could probably make 1.4, maybe even 1.5 million as a transfer, but I don't really think Notre Dame is willing to pay him that much because Emil Wagner is a good player. He's a great leader for this team, but is he really worth $1.5 million? I have my doubts about that, especially when you have a young player like Will Black, who's just been waiting his turn and could be ready to take that next step next season as a redshirt freshman. So Notre Dame is going to have to make some difficult decisions there, as will Emil Wagner. Running back, Aeneas Williams, he's been RB3 all season long for Notre Dame, had to sit and watch while Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price ran all over opposing defenses, and I'm sure that was really frustrating for Williams because he played a big role as a true freshman. If he does decide to stick around, I think he'll be RB1 next season, but who knows how this entire season changed his perspective on the whole deal, but I do expect Notre Dame to get this done and bring back Aeneas Williams. Jane Greathouse, I have no idea. One of the weirdest seasons for any individual player at Notre Dame in a long time. He redshirted this year after his injury. A lot of people suspect that he could enter the transfer portal, and that's the reason why he sat out the rest of the season to begin with. But then there are also other people who say that he's going to be back next season. I have no idea, but what I do know is that if Jaden Greathouse does decide to come back to Notre Dame next year, he is not going to make nearly as much money next year as he did this past year. Christian Gray, we've talked about it before on this show. At one point in the summer, I think he was all in on declaring for the NFL draft after the season, but he didn't have a particularly great season. Is Notre Dame going to be willing to pay him to come back? Or are they like, Christian Gray, you did a lot for us. You could go on in the transfer portal, maybe find more money elsewhere. And Notre Dame has young defensive backs like Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary who are eager for their opportunity. Plus, you got incoming freshmen like Aiden Pouncey and Kari Adams who have really bright futures ahead of them. So that's another one of those situations where it's not just the player who has to make a decision. Notre Dame does too. KK Smith, the wide receiver, not a starter, but he was starting to come on late in the year. And then defensive end Josh Burnham, there's been some rumblings that maybe he could be looking elsewhere, but Notre Dame would certainly love to keep him next year because he's another player who had a really stellar second half once he was finally healthy. Notre Dame does have a really strong track record of retaining players they truly want to keep, unless it's a no-brainer NFL decision like Jeremiah Love. And I would honestly even put Jadarian Price in that category as well, because it looks like Jadarian Price could be the second running back coming off the board right behind Jeremiah Love. So it's not like there is all that much Jadarian Price could do to improve his draft stock if that's the case. Plus, he's a running back. You want to get in the NFL and be fresh as humanly possible, so that way you're in a better position to get that second contract. And not every player that I just mentioned is going to be prioritized equally, but if Notre Dame can keep most of them, especially Boubacar Traore, Billy Schrauth, Adon Schuler, Aeneas Williams, and I would also put Jalen Sneed in that mix as well, because before it seemed like he was headed out the door, but then KVA got hurt, and who knows when he's going to be back next season, so it'd be great if they could retain him. If they can bring all of those guys back, they are going to be in great shape heading into next season. And there might even be a few players I didn't mention who are weighing their options, but retaining the players Notre Dame wants to keep is absolutely paramount for 2026. All right, that is the foundation. Then Notre Dame has to raise its ceiling by upgrading through the transfer portal and on the recruiting trail. That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Irish with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to lockedonirish.supercast.com. That's lockedonirish.supercast.com, or check the link in the show notes to learn more. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into that moment. Their live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up, and you can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. This past Sunday, the Buffalo Bills were down 21-0 in the first half against the Patriots, but if you live bet Bills money line at that point in time, you would have cashed out in a big way because Josh Allen led an incredible comeback and the Bills won 35-31. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Welcome back to Locked On Irish. Today, we are breaking down Notre Dame's top priorities in a critical offseason, and roster construction is crucial. The Irish have to improve in the transfer portal. Once Notre Dame has a better understanding of its current roster and who's coming back and who's leaving, they have to go all in on the transfer portal, which opens up officially on January 2nd. I don't mean that they need to take like 20 transfers or anything like that, because that's not the case. It's never going to be the case with Notre Dame. But they do need to clearly identify their positions of need. And once they do, they have to go all in on their top targets and then land them. One of the few benefits of missing the playoff, and there are very few, is that Notre Dame now has more time to evaluate transfer portal targets and put together the best NIL packages possible. Last year, they were trying to do that in the middle of a playoff run, and I think it showed. The transfer class as a whole was good, not great. And yes, I understand that a lot of this work is done during the season, but when they have to finalize all this stuff very early on in the offseason, Notre Dame was also preparing for the college football playoff. And when you look at the transfer class, Malachi Fields was a huge hit, obviously. He was one of the best portal positions Notre Dame has ever had, certainly at the wide receiver position. Another wide receiver, Will Pauling, proved to be an important piece, not just for his on-field production, but also for his leadership off the field. He was the first non-quarterback transfer to be elected captain, and I think that shows you the type of impact that Will Pauling had on this team. Defensive back Devontae Smith really came on late in the season once he finally got healthy, but he basically missed the first 2 months of the year, and that really hurt Notre Dame, as we saw in the Texas A&M game. Defensive tackle Jared Dawson was solid, and Elijah Hughes was pretty good as well. I'm really excited to see what Hughes can do next year since he has another year of eligibility. And then there's safety Jalen Stroman. He didn't provide what Notre Dame was hoping for and ended up as a backup safety. He did obviously have that great game against Syracuse, but he was a liability in coverage, especially in that Texas A&M game, and that hurt Notre Dame. Ty Washington, the tight end, he was a decent backup, but I expected more from him. And then kicker Noah Burnett was obviously a disaster, and Notre Dame has to do much better than that in this next cycle, because they cannot go into next season without a competent field goal kicker. That was painful to watch, and I can only imagine how painful it was for Marcus Freeman and Marty Biaggi. So overall, that's like a solid group of transfers, but if Notre Dame wants to build a championship caliber roster for next year, they need to bring in a great portal class this time around. And here's what I think they need, and I'm going to have a full episode dedicated to this in the near future, but we'll just kind of run through the main points here. They need an experienced backup quarterback for CJ Carr. They can't just go out there with CJ Carr and then a bunch of freshmen. That's not a good position for anyone. They also need one elite wide receiver who is at least as good as Malachi Fields, if not better. Nick Marsh, the wide receiver from Michigan State who put his name in the transfer portal, would be absolutely perfect, and I believe that Notre Dame is absolutely in the running for his services. Beyond him, they need at least one more wide receiver and possibly 2 or 3 total, depending on what Jaden Greathouse decides. If they can land Nick Marsh and then another experienced wideout like a Will Pauling, that would be ideal at that position. They might need a running back, depending on what Aeneas Williams decides. But again, I think he's going to be back on the team next year. And if he comes back, they're probably not going to need another running back. Love is gone. Price is gone. Jabron Payne is probably gone. But if they have Williams and then Keedron Young, if he's healthy, Nolan James Jr., and then the 2 freshman running back who are coming in, that's a pretty good room. But like, if Justice Haynes wants to come to Notre Dame, you take him and you figure out the rest later. They could also add a tight end, but Cooper Flanagan is healthy, and I expect James Flanagan to take a big leap going into year 2. That's a solid 1-2 punch at the position. And then you have Ty Washington as a strong third tight end. But they absolutely need 2 defensive tackles, because they're going to lose Jared Dawson, and they're going to lose Gabriel Rubio, and they're probably going to lose Jason Onye. So this is probably the second biggest position of need behind wide receiver, and they need numbers. They can't just rely on one guy. They need multiple players at this position in the transfer portal, just like they did last year when they went out there and they got Dawson and they got Hughes. And if you can find a defensive end who is as impactful as Javonte Jean-Baptiste was back in 2023, you take him too. At linebacker, I don't think they'll look in the portal, but if Jalen Snead decides to leave, they might have to, because you have Drake Bowen and you have Jane Osbury, and Madden Framo is going to be a sophomore, but who knows when Kingston Viliamu-Asa is going to be back from his injury, and you would really like to have another player who could get after the quarterback like Jalen Snead does. So that's going to be a big decision for him, and then Notre Dame is going to have to make decisions based off that decision by Jalen Snead. At defensive back, I do expect them to go out there and add another nickel. They have done that for the past 3 years. They had Devontae Smith this past season, Jordan Clark the year before that, and then Thomas Harper. So they've had a pretty good run. Unfortunately for Devontae Smith, he wasn't able to stay healthy, but there's an argument to be made that he was probably the most talented of that group, and Marcus Freeman clearly prefers a veteran at that position. Even with young, talented defensive backs on the roster, you want a grown man at nickel, and they should be able to find one this offseason. And finally, they're going to need a new kicker and punter because James Rendell is likely gone. So all in all, they absolutely need at least 8 players. 1 backup quarterback, 2 wide receivers, 2 defensive tackles, a nickel, a kicker, and a punter. But I'd honestly expect them to take a couple more beyond that, so the total number of incoming transfers should land around 10. This isn't about quantity for Notre Dame as much as it is about quality, and they should have the resources to land high-level transfers once the portal officially opens up on January 2nd. But beyond the transfer portal, they also need to maintain momentum on the recruiting trail. That's another key priority this offseason. This isn't directly tied to 2026, but it is extremely important for the long-term future of this program. Notre Dame has serious momentum on the recruiting trail. The class of 2026 is the best class that they have signed in the internet era, and they finished in the top 5 across every credible recruiting ranking. There was a time when that felt impossible. Brian Kelly would certainly tell you that, right? When he said that Notre Dame was shopping down a different aisle. But under Marcus Freeman, a top 5 class is now the expectation. They're already off to a really strong start in the class of 2027. They currently have 9 commits, although 1 is a long snapper, and I expect quarterback Teddy Gerard to reclassify to the class of 2026, which puts the total number for the class of 2027 closer to 7. Even so, they're in a great position. They just landed a commitment from top 50 cornerback Xavier Hassan, and last week they picked up another 4-star corner in Ace Alston. And based on how last cycle played out, I'd expect another run of commitments in the spring. That's when Rodney Dunham committed, and then Ebenezer Iwatade followed him, and they had a nice little stretch run there. And then once again in the summer, once official visits really ramp up. We might not ever see another stretch like June of 2025 when Notre Dame landed nearly every remaining high-priority target in a 3-week span. They had all those recruits on campus at one weekend, June 12th, which coincidentally enough, I was there for a wedding and actually saw some of the festivities going on. And then they had another huge weekend after that. And they landed literally every guy that they wanted. And now they're off to a very fast start again, just like last year. They're in the mix for some elite prospects, such as 5-star running back Kaman Spell, 5-star linebacker Cooper Witten, the son of Jason Witten, and 5-star defensive lineman Marcus Fatu. To compete with Georgia and to compete with Ohio State every single year, you have to recruit like them every single year. Notre Dame did that in 2026, and they're on track to do it again in 2027. Notre Dame will also have to look inward to figure out what they need to fix to avoid slow starts and determine their future in an expanded college football playoff and a fractured relationship with the ACC. So what comes next for the Irish? That's coming right up. Today's episode is also brought to you by Omaha Steaks. The holidays are here, and whether you're hosting family, planning the perfect gift, or just trying to keep things simple and delicious, Omaha Steaks is making it easier than ever. From effortless holiday entertaining to unforgettable gifts, Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience straight to your door. And what makes it even better? With Omaha Steaks, you always know exactly what you're gifting. USDA certified tender steaks, premium proteins, gourmet sides, and decadent desserts that make anyone feel appreciated. I've sent Omaha Steaks as gifts before, and the reaction is always the same. This is the best gift ever. I love how easy it is to gift because it shows up frozen, it's packed beautifully, and it's ready to cook. And the steaks are perfectly aged and insanely tender. It is restaurant level at home. Save big on gourmet gifts and holiday favorites with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com, and for an extra $35 off, use code COLLEGE at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. We are back with Notre Dame's top priorities this offseason, and one that I don't think has been talked about enough lately is how Notre Dame needs to improve their self-scouting and their entire offseason preparation because, every offseason we're going to talk about the coaching carousel. We're going to talk about the transfer portal. We're going to talk about high school recruiting. But this year, one of the biggest storylines is how Notre Dame adjusts its offseason workouts and practice structure so that they are better prepared to start fast. That has been a real weakness for Notre Dame during the Marcus Freeman era. We saw it in his first year as a head coach. In 2022, they started 0-2 with losses to Ohio State, which is forgivable, and Marshall, which is unforgivable. In 2023, they actually did come out pretty hot that year, but the early schedule was much easier. They went to Dublin to take on Navy. They smoked them. Then Tennessee Tech, Central Michigan, NC State in there as well. They had no problems with them, but then they lost to Ohio State in September. In 2024, they beat Texas A&M in the season opener on the road, which was super impressive, but then they lost to NIU at home in week 2. That made no sense, and it still makes no sense today. In 2025, they started at 0-2 against the 2 best teams on the schedule, but the bigger issue was how unprepared they looked defensively and how poorly they seemed to understand their own personnel on defense and offense, especially in the first game. Notre Dame was only throwing screens and these little dump passes with CJ Carr until they absolutely had to throw it downfield, and then once he did, the offense finally had a rhythm, and they started moving the ball and scoring some points. Marcus Freeman is 1-3 in home openers as a head coach. That's a pretty alarming stat, and it doesn't really make sense given how good his teams become later on in the year. Freeman has clearly shown he's very good at developing his team as the season progresses. Some teams start fast and then they fade in November. With Freeman, it's largely been the opposite. And next year, the schedule isn't nearly as brutal at the beginning, but they open up against the Wisconsin Badgers, and that program is going to have plenty to prove after being just absolutely awful in recent years. So Notre Dame is going to have to be ready to play right away. I've also heard that Wisconsin is going to invest a lot more in the football program and their rosters, so I do expect Notre Dame to take on a much improved Wisconsin team. Will the Irish be more talented? Are they going to be better equipped? Yeah, but still, they have to go out there and show it. In recent years, they have not been able to do that consistently at the start of the season. And with the way that the schedule sets up, Notre Dame has to finish at least 11-1 to make the playoff. They are not getting in at 10-2 next year with that schedule. So they cannot afford to stumble out of the gate again, and it is on the coaching staff to figure out why these slow starts keep happening. I don't understand. I don't really pretend to know the exact answer because, media access is very limited during spring practice and fall camp, and we're not there at the winter workouts or the summer workouts. So we don't see how practices are structured. We just see the results on the field in the fall. But Marcus Freeman and his staff have to be better at self-evaluation so that when the season starts, they have a much clearer understanding of their personnel and how to best deploy them. This obviously matters in summer workouts and fall camp, but I think it applies to winter conditioning and spring practice because every single one of those reps matters. They have to maximize all of that offseason time so that they are ready to go the moment they take the field at Lambeau. And lastly, they need to figure out their future in an expanded college football playoff and fractured ACC. The deadline for conference commissioners and Notre Dame Athletic Director Pete Bavacqua to agree on a new playoff format for 2026, which will run through the 2031 postseason, has been extended to January 23rd. They need to decide whether to keep the 12-team playoff the way it is or expand it further. Bavacqua has publicly advocated for a 16-team playoff format with 5 automatic bids for conference champions and 11 at-large spots. I would prefer that they stay at 12, but I don't know if that's going to happen long term. The Big Ten wants a 24-team format with a heavy emphasis on automatic qualifiers and very few at-large bids, which would obviously not be great for Notre Dame. I highly doubt that model gets approved at this point in time because Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, doesn't want it, Notre Dame doesn't want it, and it doesn't sound like the other conference commissioners are excited about it either. And Sankey is arguably the most important person and most powerful person in college football right now, and he wants as many at-large bids as possible because it benefits the SEC. So ultimately, I think the playoff will expand to 16 teams, and the bigger question for Notre Dame is, what is their place in the new format? We've already heard about the automatic bid if they are ranked in the top 12. I think that was actually put in place for a expanded playoff. So if Notre Dame finishes in the top 12, they're going to be in a 16-team format. But that is for Pete Bavacqua to figure out. He also needs to push for more transparency in the selection process so Notre Dame or any other team never ends up in a situation like the Irish were this past season. And beyond the college football playoff, there's the bigger question, what is Notre Dame's future with the ACC? Right now, it's clearly trending in a negative direction after everything that has transpired in recent weeks. Pete Bavacqua said that the ACC has done permanent damage to that relationship, and it sounded like a threat. But if Notre Dame decides to move on, what are the real alternatives? We've talked about a few possible paths on the show already, but it's still hard to know how realistic any of them truly are at this point in time. Pete Bavacqua probably isn't going to be able to solve all of this in one offseason, but after one of the most frustrating endings to a season in a really long time, Notre Dame at least needs to start clearing a path forward because standing still just isn't an option anymore. All right, that is going to do it for me today. Thank you again for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video, and drop a comment. Or if you're listening on audio, please follow the show and take a second to rate and review on your preferred platform because it really helps us grow. And don't forget to send in your questions for the Friday mailbag in the YouTube comments or on social media at Locked On Irish on X or Locked On Irish Pod on Instagram. And for those of you listening on Spotify, did Locked On Irish make your Spotify Wrapped? Prove it on social media to secure a free month of our brand new Everydayer Club. Just tag our national Locked On Podcast Network account on any social platform and we'll drop you a code. Be one of the first to join the Everydayer Club to get your favorite show ad-free and exclusive access to the members-only Discord channel. I'm going to be back tomorrow with recruiting insider Eric Thomas as we break down Notre Dame's 2 big defensive back commitments in the class of 2027, and we're going to take our first deep dive into that group. We'll see you then.